life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. That's exactly what happened to me one ordinary Wednesday evening. I had just returned home from work, the sound of my heels clicking on the wooden floor as I entered the house. The day had been long and exhausting, and all I wanted was to relax in a hot bath and unwind. Little did I know that evening would leave a lasting impact on my life, one that would change everything in our household. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue sharing more fascinating real-life stories like this one. And don't forget to watch until the end and like the video, because this story is truly interesting. Please click the like button to show your support. The house was quiet when I walked in, which was not unusual. Ethan, my husband, had mentioned earlier that he would be at a late meeting. He had been working extra hours lately to meet a big project deadline, which left only Liam, Ethan's son from his previous marriage, at home. Liam, 20 years old, was a quiet yet polite young man who rarely caused trouble. He worked part-time at the local hardware store and spent most of his free time in his room. Although we weren't particularly close, we had a respectful relationship. I always saw him as someone who valued his privacy, much like his father. Over time, I became accustomed to the calm atmosphere when it was just the two of us in the house. I placed my bag on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water when I noticed Liam's truck parked in the driveway. That seemed odd since he usually worked the evening shift. I called his name out casually, my voice echoing through the empty house, but there was no reply. Assuming he was in his room with his headphones on or maybe taking a nap, I didn't think much of it. After finishing my water, I decided to head upstairs to change into something more comfortable. The long day had left me eager to relax. As I passed by the bathroom, I heard the faint sound of running water and saw the door slightly ajar. This struck me as unusual because Liam was always very particular about privacy and always shut doors completely, especially the bathroom door. My curiosity was piqued, and I hesitated before gently pushing the door open a little further. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Liam was standing by the sink, his back to me, his shoulders hunched in a way that suggested deep concentration. His movements were erratic, almost frantic, and I noticed he was shirtless, with his jeans hanging loosely on his hips. In his hands, he appeared to be holding a washcloth, scrubbing something that was out of view. The creak of the door startled him, and he spun around, his eyes wide with panic. "Oh my God, I didn't hear you come in," he said, his voice shaky. I froze, just as startled as he was, my eyes darting between him and the washcloth. A rush of awkwardness hit me, making me feel guilty for intruding. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, turning my gaze away. "I didn't mean to intrude." I quickly stepped back, my heart racing. I reached for the doorknob, ready to give him the privacy he clearly wanted. But before I could close the door, Liam's voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, his tone pleading. "It's not what you think." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to run down the hallway and pretend this never happened, but another part of me was curious. His voice didn't carry the defensiveness of someone caught doing something wrong. Instead, it was filled with embarrassment and desperation. Against my better judgment, I turned back to face him, keeping my gaze focused on his face. "Okay," I said cautiously, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What's going on, Liam?" Liam looked down, his face turning bright red. He seemed to struggle with finding the right words, his hands fidgeting with the washcloth. Finally, he sighed deeply and said, "It's just, I didn't know who else to ask." "Ask about what?" I prompted gently, my curiosity growing despite the awkwardness of the moment. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "It's personal," he admitted. "I've been dealing with some stuff, and I don't know what to do. Dad's not here, and you're the only other person I can talk to." His vulnerability caught me off guard. Liam had always been independent, rarely opening up about anything personal. The fact that he was turning to me for help made me stop in my tracks. I stepped into the bathroom, closing the door behind me slightly to offer us some privacy. "All right," I said, keeping my tone even. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Liam hesitated before finally beginning to speak. He started with vague words, stumbling as he tried to explain the discomfort he had been experiencing. I listened patiently, piecing together the fragments of his story. It quickly became clear that this was a sensitive issue he felt too embarrassed to discuss with his dad. As he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a surge of empathy. It's never easy to ask for help, especially about something so personal. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the battle between wanting help and fearing judgment. Okay, I said after a moment, thinking carefully. First of all, it's good that you're paying attention to these things. It shows you care about your health. And second, there's no shame in asking questions or seeking advice. Liam looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Really? You don't think it's weird? Not at all, I assured him. Everyone has questions about their body at some point. It's normal. I spent the next several minutes giving him advice, based on my own knowledge and experience, while keeping the conversation as practical and straightforward as possible, avoiding anything that could make him feel more uncomfortable. I could tell that, despite the awkward beginning, the conversation was a huge relief for him. As the conversation progressed, the initial tension began to fade and Liam seemed to relax. By the time we finished, he looked noticeably calmer and even managed a small smile. Thanks, he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't think I could talk to anyone about this. You're welcome, Liam, I replied, returning his smile and feeling relieved that the tension had lifted. And remember, it's always okay to ask for help. No one has all the answers. As I left the bathroom, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was glad I could be there for Liam when he needed someone to talk to. On the other hand, the situation had been so unexpected and unusual that I wasn't sure how to process it. It felt significant, like it marked a shift in our relationship, but I didn't know what it meant or how it would play out in the future. I tried to shake off the strange feeling as I went about the rest of my evening, but it lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow. The house remained quiet, with only the faint hum of the air conditioning breaking the stillness. Ethan came home late that night, tired but cheerful, completely unaware of the unusual conversation that had taken place in his absence. As I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the evening in my mind. Something had changed, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. All I knew for sure was that life in our household would never be the same. The days after that unexpected encounter were odd, to say the least. It wasn't that anything particularly dramatic occurred. Everything seemed normal on the surface. Ethan continued with his work as usual, Liam kept up his routine of part-time shifts and studying, and I balanced my responsibilities at home and work. But beneath it all, there was an unspoken tension, subtle but undeniable, between Liam and me. It wasn't just that we were more aware of each other's vulnerabilities. It was something deeper. There had been a shift in our dynamic, one I wasn't sure how to navigate. Liam had always been a bit of a mystery to me, keeping most of his life to himself. Our conversations, though polite, had never gone beyond basic pleasantries. But now, after that bathroom conversation, everything felt different. A new sense of understanding seemed to have developed between us, one that was both uneasy and, strangely, reassuring. I found myself thinking about Liam more than I expected. Not in a motherly or overly concerned way, but with a sense of curiosity. How had I missed this side of him before? It hit me that Liam was more than just the quiet young man who stayed in his room. He had depth and an emotional world I hadn't yet begun to comprehend. It was on a Friday evening when Liam's behavior became more apparent. Ethan had gone out to meet a client, and I was preparing dinner. Liam hadn't returned from his shift at the hardware store yet. While chopping vegetables, I heard the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway, and I paused, my knife frozen in midair, unsure of how to greet him. The awkwardness that had grown between us over the past few days had built a wall, and I didn't know how to break it. When the front door opened, I called out, "Hey, Liam," trying to sound casual. He didn't answer immediately, but I heard him walking toward the kitchen. He seemed tired, but smiled faintly. "Hey," he greeted me softly. "What's for dinner?" "Just some pasta," I replied, relieved that he wasn't acting distant like he had the past few days. "You hungry?" "Yeah, I'm starving," he answered, walking over to the counter to grab a glass of water. We ate in silence at first, with only the clink of forks against plates breaking the quiet. However, I noticed that Liam seemed more relaxed than he had been recently. His smile appeared more genuine, and his posture was less rigid. After a while, he set his fork down and looked at me, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he began, pausing briefly before continuing. I wanted to thank you again for listening. I looked up from my plate and met his gaze, feeling my heart soften from the sincerity in his voice. I had been waiting for this moment, unsure of how to respond, but glad that he felt comfortable enough to talk. Of course, Liam, I said gently. I'm glad I could help. We fell into another pause, but this time there wasn't the same tension that had been present before. It felt like we were genuinely conversing, not just exchanging pleasantries. You've always been kind to me, he said, his voice quieter now. And I didn't want you to think I didn't appreciate it. I nodded, unsure of how to convey how much his words meant to me. I know it's not always easy, I said after a moment, but I'm glad you know you can talk to me anytime. He smiled again, this time more naturally. I'll try to remember that, he said, reaching for another bite of his pasta. As the meal continued, we shifted to more casual topics, his studies, how his part-time job was going, and the latest show we were both watching on Netflix. It was a small step forward, but it was still progress. I realized that despite the awkwardness following our earlier conversation, Liam was starting to open up in subtle ways. Later that evening, after dinner, I settled on the couch with a book to unwind. I heard Liam retreat to his room, his footsteps light on the floor. I couldn't help but wonder if he was still processing everything we'd discussed. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Ethan came home later each night, his job demanding more of his time, and Liam, though less distant, still kept to himself in many ways. We shared brief but meaningful exchanges during dinner, and he seemed more at ease around me, though there was still an unspoken tension between us that neither of us seemed ready to address. Then, about a week after our bathroom conversation, Liam did something that completely took me by surprise. It was almost bedtime, and I was curled up on the couch watching the latest episode of a drama when Liam appeared in the doorway. His face was unreadable. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sat up quickly, unsure of what was coming. "Of course, come on in." He hesitated before stepping fully into the room, his posture stiff, as though unsure of what he was about to say. "What's on your mind?" I asked gently, wanting to make him feel safe. Liam shifted from one foot to the other, avoiding my gaze for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about the stuff I talked to you about, and I think I need to tell Dad. I don't know how, but I think he needs to know what I'm going through." His words stunned me. This vulnerability was different from before. It was a sign that he was taking responsibility for his feelings and recognizing that he needed help. Not just from me, but from Ethan as well. "That's a big step, Liam," I said, trying to reassure him. "I think Ethan will really appreciate you coming to him. It's not easy, but it's important." He nodded, meeting my gaze. There was a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. It was clear this decision hadn't been easy for him, but he had come a long way. "I don't want to make things weird between us," he said quietly. "I know it's been different lately." I shook my head, warmth flooding me. "It's not weird at all. We're family, Liam. We help each other no matter what." He gave me a small smile and nodded before turning to leave. "Thanks for everything," he said over his shoulder as he exited the room. I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I felt proud of him. He was learning to communicate, to seek help, and to process his emotions in a healthy way. I couldn't help but feel like I was witnessing an important moment in his growth. The next day, Ethan came home earlier than usual. He looked exhausted, but there was a certain lightness to his steps. "Hey," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "How's everything going?" "Good," I smiled. "I think Liam has something on his mind, though." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "He's been more open lately," I explained, "and he mentioned he wants to talk to you about something important." Ethan's expression softened, a mix of concern and anticipation crossing his face. "I'll talk to him," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Thanks for letting me know." That evening, after dinner, Ethan and Liam sat down together in the living room. I couldn't hear much of their conversation, but I saw Liam lean in, speaking earnestly to his father. Ethan listened intently, his face filled with concern but also warmth. It was clear that this was a turning point for their relationship, a moment when Liam had crossed into adulthood, and Ethan was ready to meet him there. As the weeks passed, life began to return to a more regular rhythm. The unspoken tension between Liam and me gradually faded. He no longer avoided me, and though I could tell he was still processing what we'd discussed, he seemed lighter, more like himself. Ethan and Liam spent more time together, strengthening their bond, and it was evident that Ethan was making an effort to be more present for his son. One weekend, Ethan suggested we take a day trip to the lake. He hoped it would strengthen the bond between the three of us, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. The weather was perfect, clear skies and a gentle breeze. We packed a picnic, loaded the car, and set off for a day of fun and relaxation by the water. We spent hours swimming, playing frisbee, and lounging on the shore. Liam seemed genuinely happy, laughing and joking with Ethan in a way I hadn't seen before. It warmed my heart to see them connecting, and I felt hopeful that this trip marked a turning point for all of us. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues over the water, we sat on the beach, enjoying the last moments of the day. Ethan had fallen asleep on a blanket, his snores blending with the sound of the waves. Liam and I sat a few feet apart, watching the horizon. "Thanks for coming today," he said after a long silence. "It's been nice, just spending time together." I smiled, feeling peace wash over me. "We should do things like this more often." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "Yeah, I think it helps." We sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, the unspoken understanding between us filling the quiet. When Ethan woke up, we packed up our things and headed home. The drive was filled with laughter and stories about the day. That night, as I lay in bed next to Ethan, I reflected on how far we had come as a family. The past few weeks had been challenging, but they had also brought us closer in ways I hadn't expected. Liam's journey was far from over, but I felt confident he was on the right path. And so were we.